Greetings and welcome to episode 40. Ben, can you believe it's episode 40 of a
Wow.
Plain Accounts web series, where every week we discuss at least one of this coming Sunday's lectionary passages. Today I am joined, as usual, with Ben Kramer. Ben, do you want to say hello?
Great to be here, as always.
Yes, great to see you, Ben. Live long and prosper. We are on episode 40, which is crazy. And today we're looking at Luke 19. But before we jump into this, I do want to give one last pitch and one last thanks for all who have given during our October's capital campaign. We've been shooting to raise 300 $5 donations. It's looking like we're not going to get to that complete goal, which is okay. We set our sights really high on purpose. But we want to give a big thanks to everybody who has given during the month of October. And please keep giving. And please consider making a monthly donation to a Plain account if this is something that you have found to be beneficial to you over the past 10 months. So thank you to everyone who has given. This month will keep us sustained in our current platform for the next year. And we're hoping that we can do some more developments with that. So thank you for your giving, and please keep giving.
Yes, and all those need to be reminded that Danny has pledged to shave his head if we reach that goal. So give if you want to see Danny bald. He's been promising that from the beginning. So let's give. Let's give intently.
Thanks for that, Ben.
You're welcome.
All right, well, we're looking at Luke 19, 1 through 10. We're going to read from the New Revised Standard Version. And this is a passage that we all know, right? We're familiar with this. Jesus and Zacchaeus. Listen to these words. He, that is Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. Then Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost. This is the written word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Okay, so one of the things that we need to know is, plainly put, how familiar this is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from such a young age, we've sung the song, we know what's going on, and unfortunately, we become familiar only with Zacchaeus' stature, not his posture, or not the redemption, or not the transformation that happens later on. So we have to address this. So Ben, help us out. What's going on?
Well, I think one of the really important things, because usually the important things will be emphasized so much that then they become so familiar that we don't pay attention to them anymore. And so I think the stature is important, even from the nursery rhyme. Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. He had to climb a sycamore tree because the Lord he wanted to see. We emphasize that because it's important, but knowing why it's important, I think, is key. When you are a short person, there is no way to control that, right? When this man is Zacchaeus is an older man, presumably. You can't control the size. That's just, you're predisposed, right? And I think what Luke is trying to emphasize here is that is how strong some of our cultural pigeonholes can be. We can segment a group of people in our culture to such an extent that they have no control over how they're perceived, no more than a short person has control over their height.
Right.
And so Zacchaeus is a tax collector. He's one that's already put, because of his role, he is put in a quadrant of society that is labeled a sinner, labeled a fraudulent character, and is just cast out, like without any sort of second thought to who Zacchaeus might be. And because he is so pigeonholed, he is considered unseen,
Right.
just ignored. And so he has to go to great lengths to be noticed, to make himself aware of who Jesus is and where he's at, because his culture has completely pushed him to the side. So I think that's a huge theme that is usually watered down in the preaching of this text.
Right. So you've got to look at kind of that interpersonal reality that's going on here.
Absolutely.
And he's so desperate, he climbs this tree.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be getting into how you preach it a little bit, but there's a lot of interpersonal dynamics going on here. I also think it's worth noting kind of some geographical context. This is a children's story all the way around, right? Jesus entered where? Jericho. What happened to Jericho? What is Jericho?
Walls fell down.
Joshua, right? Joshua and Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. You could preach this message in children's songs. But this is an important place for Jewish people, because this is a place of unfaithfulness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've read in previous weeks, Jesus asked the question, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? This is kind of one of the questions that's been ruminating in the readers' minds. And then Jesus enters Jericho, this place of historical unfaithfulness, and he finds what? A tax collector who was rich. Now, what if you've been reading Luke up to chapter 19, what do you think of tax collectors, and what do you think of rich people? Who are rich people, right? If you've been reading through the gospel thus far, you're like, oh, Zacchaeus, sorry, dude, you suck.
Yeah, you are not entering the gates of heaven. Sorry.
Right. And in of all places, Jericho.
Right.
And so this man of short stature climbs the tree to see Jesus, because Jesus was going to pass that by. And then this is an important thing to note, and we can mention this now before moving on, but what's really important is what Jesus does. He sees him. Like, that to me is what this passage is about. It's about
Absolutely.
Jesus seeing Zacchaeus.
Right.
A man who is never looked at. A man who, because of his stature and because of his geography and because of his profession, he's looked down upon.
Right. Well, and that's another theme that has been going through this entire gospel from blind Bartimaeus forward.
Right.
I love how Scott Daniels calls the disciples in the Gospel of Luke, or in the Gospel in general. He calls them the disciples, because they are so they're the last ones to get who Jesus is. Even a blind man can see that he's the Son of David. Bartimaeus is the first one to call them out, call Jesus who he is, the Son of David. And the disciples have no idea. They're just still trying to figure out who he is as Messiah, who he is as King, who he is as the Son of God. And so for Zacchaeus to be seen is also a precursor for us to think, do we see Jesus?
Right.
Or have we placed him in those categories where he's unseen as well, expecting Jesus to live into our picture rather than have our picture shaped by who Jesus is?
Right.
That's a huge theme that can't be underplayed here either.
Yeah. And so I want to look at one other thing really quickly before moving on. I want to look at kind of the literary context. I want to look at some of the Greek and what's going on here. And there are a few things I think we need to look at. First of all, when Zacchaeus speaks, first of all, I think we have to recognize the timing of this. All who saw it began to grumble and said, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. Jesus has gone to be in the house of one who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord. I don't know that we recognize that Zacchaeus stood there.
Stood there, yeah.
This is not later in his house. This is public. This is in front of the crowd that Zacchaeus, which D. Mark Davis in Left Behind and Loving It notes that when Jesus addresses Zacchaeus, he calls him Zacchaeus, kind of like almost a nickname. But Zacchaeus stood publicly and said this to Christ. But what he says, half of my possessions, the NRSV says, Lord, I will give to the poor. The unfortunate thing about this translation is it's not in the past tense in Greek. I mean, it's not in the future tense in Greek. He doesn't say, I will give. It's not the future tense. It's the present tense. Look, half of my possessions I give to the poor. And one thing that was noted by David Luce was that this is what's called the future present tense. But what he said is that that's a disputed tense in Greek, but this is the only time in the New Testament that it appears. And he said, we've created this category in Greek grammar to try to understand Zacchaeus' giving to the poor in the future tense rather than reading it in the present tense in which it's written. And so Zacchaeus, he's saying, as I understand it, this is something that I do. I give to the poor half of my possessions. Then he says, if I have defrauded anyone of anything, the NRSV says, I will pay back 4 times. Once again, it's the same word as give, and it's in the present tense. It's not in the future tense. And if I defraud anyone of anything, I pay back 4 times as much.
Yeah.
It's in the present tense here, but we also have to look, and this is, I think, really fun. You could do this in your sermon. That word defrauded is a really interesting Greek word. So you look earlier in the passage, and you see that Zacchaeus, in order to see Jesus, he climbs a sycamore tree. And a sycamore tree is kind of this fig-type tree. It's a sycamore fig tree. And if you look down in verse 8, when he says, if I have defrauded anyone of anything, that Greek word for defrauded is sykophanteo, or sykophanteo. And that's where we get our word sycophant. And a sycophant in our language today is a person who praises powerful people for their approval or for their own benefit. They praise powerful people for their own benefit. And so I think it's really helpful and fun to see Zacchaeus climbs a sycamore tree and then later says, hey, if I'm a sycophant, I'll pay back 4 times. And they have the same Greek prefix in those words. And so I think defrauded is a little bit lighter than what Zacchaeus is saying. Zacchaeus is saying, if I have been a sycophant, towards anyone, I will pay back 4 times as much, which is the primary insult towards tax collectors, right?
Right.
What's a tax collector? They're sycophants.
Right.
They're people who have given over to the powerful political empire of Rome for their own benefit. Right. And so he's saying, listen, if I'm considered a sycophant, I'll pay back 4 times as much. I pay back 4 times as much, present tense. And so Zacchaeus seems evidently to not be the terrible person that we so often want to make him out to be. How many of the Pharisees could say that half of their possessions they give to the poor? And that if they are even perceived as being power hungry, that they're going to go above and beyond the Levitical code from Leviticus chapter 6 to give. And so to me, this is a rich story about Zacchaeus and who he is in reference to the hyper-religious of the day.
Yeah. Well, and it fits so well. I think it was very intentionally placed, having just preached from if you preached on the gospel text for last week, we have a Pharisee and a tax collector.
Absolutely.
Seeking, both seeking righteousness in the sight of the Lord. And one chose a very self-righteous path, but the other chose to be humble because of his desperate state of where he needed to be with God. And today we see that in this passage of Zacchaeus, that that's very embodied. That's actually being displayed for us. That because you don't hear him say, "Have mercy upon me, O God, I'm a sinner." You really don't have a declaration of repentance. You could like construe Zacchaeus's phrase, "If I have defrauded anyone, I will give back."
Right.
You could kind of construe that as a repentance, but
if you see it as the future tense,
in the future tense, exactly right.
If it's a declaration of what is currently happening, is that repentance?
Right. Then it's simply, we're simply seeing what he has been planning to do all along.
Right.
And so then that puts into light Jesus' phrase towards the end. Salvation has come to this house today. Is salvation because of a sinner, which is playing into the cultural perspective of who Zacchaeus is, that a sinner has been repented, or that Zacchaeus, because he finally was able to reach out and be with Jesus, he is still going along to have his liberation given to those that he may or may not have defrauded.
Right.
In the present tense. Is that the salvation that Jesus is talking about? But both have to be connected to the presence of Jesus being in that home.
Right.
To be made aware, it is the Son of God then declaring he is a son of Abraham. And so there's really a lot to work with here.
Yeah, and so when we see the last statement, for the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost, we have in our evangelical tendencies this notion to read that and say, oh, this tax collector is damned, and now he's not. That we read lost like that. But I'm wondering if, given the emphasis of sight in this passage, of seeing, Jesus says the Son of Man, which is such an important title, came to seek out and save the lost. He came to see them. Those who are not seen, the Son of Man has come to see. Those who are not found, Jesus comes to find. And so I want to look at this and see Zacchaeus is a man who is overlooked because of his stature, because of his hometown, because of his profession. And Jesus says, hey, the Son of Man came to look for you people, those who are overlooked, those who are not given a place, despite whatever practices they might have. So
no chance. He would have had no chance with his culture.
Right.
With the Hebrew people. But it's also an admonition to the Israelites to be what they've been called to be, a light to the world.
Right.
They're not being a light to Zacchaeus. They're grumbling.
Right.
They're getting upset that Jesus, a rabbi, would even associate with this person.
Right.
But Jesus is highlighting, hey, you're not noticing the person who needs light the most.
Right.
But you're just going to keep him on the fringe. You're going to continue to crowd around and keep this salvation for yours. Right.
So, okay, there's a whole lot going on here, and we could have a whole lot of fun continuing this conversation. There's a ton. But I want us to switch gears to now say, okay, so what? Given all of this content, how do we preach this? What's important to preach, and what are kind of some homiletical handles in order to do this? And one of the things that I want to look at is the importance of table fellowship, of the breaking of bread with one another as a transforming practice. So Matt Pollock is a youth pastor in Fayetteville, Indiana. He's one of our contributors. He wrote on Psalm 23 last year, and I believe he's writing on the 10 Commandments this year. So we're giving him some good ones. But he sent me an article just yesterday on a white supremacist named Derek, who was is the godson of David Duke. And he was very popular on this white supremacist website called Stormfront. His dad created the website. He was one of the main contributors on it, had a weekly radio show with his dad, went to a liberal college, and it came out while he was at college there that he was a white nationalist. He had dropped the term white supremacist and was blacklisted at the school. He had made friends with a few people before that, and now all of a sudden, no communication with them. He was on the outs until one of the people that he had befriended before, he told them, before it came out that he was a white nationalist, one of his friends was an Orthodox Jew. And this Orthodox Jew invited Derek to Shabbat on Friday night every week. And over the course of many, many weeks, where the Orthodox Jew said, you treat Derek like you treat anybody else. Welcome him in here. And we're going to share a meal with him. Derek began to change. And he started to see these people that he had depersonalized as people. And eventually, over the course of many months, disavowed completely his white nationalism, and said, that's so wrong, and I hate to think how I've contributed to that. And it was that table fellowship with an Orthodox Jew who he said didn't belong in the United States of America that helped bring about this radical transformation.
Yeah.
And there's something incarnational, and that's a Eucharistic meal that is shaping and reshaping his life. And I don't think he's now Orthodox Jewish, but his life has been transformed because of the table fellowship of his friend. And so when I look at this passage, I see a great opportunity for the Eucharist. That Christ says, I'm coming to your house today. We're going to eat together. We're going to break bread together. We are going to sit at the same table. You, a sinner, and I will eat together. And to me, this is really powerful in our world of social media.
Oh, yeah.
In our world of depersonalized, dare I say, Gnostic communication, how important is it that we break bread physically in one another's homes? How important is it that we be united around the tables together where we don't have the protection of our computer screen or our phone that allows us to say things that we wouldn't say if we were looking in somebody's eyes?
Right. No.
And there's something about the table fellowship, the physical breaking of bread with one another, that is transformational, that brings about transformation in Zacchaeus' life, that I think ought to bring about transformation in the lives of us and our neighbors.
Absolutely.
Which then brings up the question, who are those who are overlooked, right?
Right.
Who are the short people in our society, in your town? Who's that guy that if you had dinner with, everybody would look at you and say, what?
Yeah.
You're going, wait, you're a pastor, right? I didn't think you went that place. I didn't think you would hang out with them. I didn't think you'd eat meals with them.
Yeah.
Who are those people in your town?
Well, just like Zacchaeus was, we see in this passage, Commonly, the most overlooked are often the most criticized. We love to talk about them, but we don't love to spend time with them.
Yeah.
I mean, easy ones. Muslims love to talk about how horrible and hateful Muslims are. But when was the last time you had a meal with one and understood that person and didn't just reduce them to their religious state? Homosexuals, gay and lesbian community. We love to talk about all of those things. But when was the last time you had a cup of coffee with somebody in that community? I mean, and it can be something as superficial as Republican and Democrat. I mean, sometimes people get so zealous about their political affiliations that they just assume everyone that they're worshiping with on Sunday is exactly in the same party as them. So
Right.
they feel free to lambaste the other side of the aisle when it's like, hey, you don't know who's voting for who
Right.
in this congregation. But we are all here to declare Christ as King.
Right.
But that doesn't shape their perspective. They assume so much that they already ostracize anybody who might identify as the other side of the aisle from them.
Right.
So it's easy to look for those who are the most criticized may be the ones that you most neglect in our culture.
Right. And are you willing to share a meal with them?
Yeah.
And
Because that's scary.
And
I'm not gonna lie. That's scary to do that.
Yeah.
You risk, just like Jesus did. He risked his social standing by going and eating at a tax collector's house. But he's well practiced at this point. He's already been with all sorts of people. So Zacchaeus is pretty good in comparison, you know.
Right.
But you risk your social standing. You risk going to some places where people aren't going to accept you, where you may be the overlooked.
Right.
But to go and have a meal is a very vulnerable position to take, because we do see that offering of transformation even at the Last Supper, where who has he been offering transformation to? Judas and Peter, people who are going to deny and betray him. But
Right.
Jesus still offers the opportunity for transformation, for salvation to come into their very lives. But it's up to them to receive that meal, to sit with Jesus.
Right. Yeah. What else? How can we make this passage apprehendable for our congregations? I'll give kind of the last word to you on this, Ben, if you have anything you feel like we need to add here to this.
Oh, well, I really like the idea of understanding the location, as you so eloquently pointed out, about where Jerusalem is, the tree, and these meanings behind stature and things like that. But I think at the end of the sermon, you could see how God really blessed Joshua by the walls crumbling down. And that is such a beautiful symbol of things becoming equalized, where the walls are torn down between that we have built ourselves. And that even goes back to the Pharisee and the tax collector from last week,
Right.
that we love to put these walls between this is righteous, this is a sinner.
Yeah.
This person is in, this person is out. And again, we see those walls here. But Jericho is such a beautiful illustration of how God does not tolerate those separations. It is not about who is in and who is out. It is a question of submitting yourself to God. And it's not up to us. I loved the quote from last week's commentary on Working Preacher that said, when you start making lines of division between who is in and who is out, you find yourself on the opposing side of God.
Right.
And so are we going to do that?
Right.
Are we going to find ourselves on the opposing side of God, or sitting at the table with the Son of God?
Once again, at Jericho, the walls came tumbling down.
The walls came tumbling down.
Right. Jesus tore them down for
Yep.
all of those pious people.
And you could even play on his name. Yeshua is just another name for Jesus, where Jehovah comes and brings salvation. So Jesus again tears down the walls.
Jesus is Joshua, right?
Yep. Yeah, embodying Joshua where the walls fell again.
Right. Right. Dude, so good, so much.
Wonderful passage.
Well, anything else? Anything else you have to add?
I could talk about this one all day, but I think we should be kind to our viewers.
Sure. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of A Plain Account. It's crazy that this was our 40th one.
I can't believe we're so old.
I know. We're looking forward to another 40. Keep in touch with what we've got going on at A Plain Account. We've done some redesign on the website, just some slight layouts. We switched the front page from rows to columns to try to help you guys navigate easier. The page should load a lot faster. We've tried to make it more mobile friendly. Drop us a note and let us know what you think, and let us know about any improvements that could be made there. Check in with us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Preach well this common but really rich passage on this almost final Sunday of Ordinary Time.
Man. We did get a request while we were airing for me to shave my beard off if we reach the goal. So not only will Danny shave his head, but I will shave my face if we reach the goal.
Look at that.
So you got two options here.
All right. Well, great to be with you, Ben. Thanks for viewing in. Preach well. Grace and peace.